Okay, good morning everybody and welcome to the incredible performance webinar featuring the rock stars of Improve. Good morning, Henrik, how are you doing?
Good morning, I'm doing terrific. I had a wonderful morning walk. I'm a bit sweaty, but I hope it doesn't show too much on the camera. I'm in space, as you can see, and I'm hunkering down so you will not see what's actually going on in reality up here. But
Tell us about your morning walk.
what do you want to know? It was beautiful. It's like 1 hour and a lot of pain in my feet, but it's worth it.
Yeah, that's how you get to the incredible performance training. So Henrik, you are a system architect. You've been with Improve for how long?
For 10 years. So it's 10 years of Improve and 10 years of Magento tinkering.
Cool. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
Daniel Forslund will run maybe a little bit more of the talking today because I think today we will focus a little bit more about the performance and front-end aspect of performance. Daniel, good morning to you.
Good morning.
What are you doing and how did you get to work this morning?
Well, bike, because it's not recommended to use any other means right now.
It's also a hipster bike with 2 gears.
Yes.
What do you do?
One more than you need.
I guess.
One more gear than you need. Yeah, that's true. So what do you do at Improve?
I'm the front-end architect at Improve. I do a lot of this that we're going to talk about today. Performance is one of my main interests, and also what I do on a daily basis, pretty much.
And how long have you been with Improve?
7 years, so I'm quite new compared to the two of you, but it's long enough.
Yeah. Okay. So today we have a few things to cover, and I just want to say that we'll keep the chat open. So if you want to chat, it will be open to do so. We will have a Q&A later. If there's something that pops up, because there will be a lot of information now, a lot of screen sharing, a lot of digging into the weeds of this. So if you have anything, shoot off a question in the chat and we'll try to pick it up. Okay. So there's a few things to cover. The first statement can be a little bit provoking, but it's one of our tech leads to said that he tried to explain to client once that, listen, website performance is not really an exact science. And that sounds weird because it should be very easy to measure. And I think that this is one of the topics we'll dig deeper into. I think it comes down to defining what we mean with performance. Everybody has an opinion about performance. I work with a large company where the CEO doesn't know much about e-commerce, but he knows he wants a fast website. And then defining fast is a little bit vague. I think getting into the measuring, agreeing on what is the definition of fast, I think is super important. So that's where we'll keep a lot of the focus today. And also what are the mechanics behind performance, because this is also, I mean, performance sounds super simple, super straightforward, but it's actually changing all the time. It's sort of similar to the Google SEO formula, where Google modifies the SEO rankings hundreds of times per year or almost daily. I think that the performance measuring are also moving very, very fast. It's been moving from desktop to mobile, etc. But also what we measure and what others measure keeps changing. And the answer of the second question might tilt towards Google Lighthouse. We'll nerd out pretty much on that one. Also some do's and, like, from a topic level, what is it we need to focus on, but also going into some practical things. What is that people, what are the common mistakes you make? And also a very hot potato is the single page application versus the multi-page application. Single page, some people call headless. This is a sort of flame war that I think requires some nuance, and I think we spent a lot of time debating this internally, and we have come down to one side, and there's a reason for it. Henrik will dig into some server-side performance, and eventually we work mostly with Salesforce and Magento. There are tons of platforms out there, but they come from, one is a cloud-based SaaS solution, another one is on-premise. What are the differences? Yeah, we'll try to cover some questions as we go along. So those are the topics we'll cover today. Before we get into this, I just want to briefly brag, because it's my webinar. I get to talk. So June 4th, we're launching an accelerator in Improove. A lot of companies run accelerators these days. It's an accelerator for Salesforce and Magento, and where performance has been a key component of this all along. And essentially what we're going to do is have a very short go live. And this is not a super limited platform. This is an enterprise level website we'll get in a super rushed manner. You will get an e-commerce manager to support it through a way. It's a fixed price delivery, and we actually deliver performance guarantee. And having said that performance is not an exact science, I just want to make a couple of references. The product listing page for this, this is the Magento version of it, scores 86 on mobile for the page speed insights, and it scores 98 on desktop. And so this is the basic clean version. It's very easy to destroy performance by adding third-party scripts, by butchering the content in there. But I think if you have a starting point on these numbers, I think you're in a pretty good spot. So I think this is what you could expect from our deliveries. We made one of our first launches yesterday. This is for Arke. It's a carbonator company that you should look into. We will get back to this one a little bit later, but please buy fancy carbonators. Okay, with that in mind, we should move over to why we are here for the performance conversations. So I'm going to hand it over to Daniel and try to figure out what is performance and why is it not an exact science.
Yeah, I mean, this image, we kind of tried to make it, we started trying to make it exact, and then realized that it's not really about exactly what's on here. The point of this illustration is kind of that there's not one thing that is performance on the web. It's all of this at once, and it's through a user device. I mean, you have to have a fast server with a fast response. Usually you need caching for that to happen. Then you have to have a network deliver it, which is the internet. You want that to be as fast as possible, and you can use services for routing the responses to the fastest spots. Like you can pay for that through some CDN services that will affect your speed. A user device is kind of the bottleneck. Whatever device or browser the user is using to access your page will affect the performance the most, probably, of all of these factors, because that device has to retrieve all the data and then render the response and boot the app, and that's why this is not really an exact science, and that's why results will vary depending on devices. It will vary depending on connections. It will vary depending on if your server response is cached or if you have browser cached resources or not. That's why measuring it is complex, and it has a lot of variables. There's a lot of things that could go right and wrong to affect the scores.
What would you say are the most fluctuating variables in here? Is it the user device?
Well, yes, for real user, measuring the user device is the most fluctuating one. the browsers are pretty consistent, like, but the devices are different.
Yeah, if you experience the internet through a Samsung J5 something, it's not a great experience overall. There's a difference between devices that is, well, hard to accommodate for.
But also the network is super important. Like even a lot of the tests that we will go through, they try to emulate or simulate slower network speeds. The problem with slower networks is not only that they're slower, it's also that they're not really consistent. Like speeds will vary with time. It won't be like if you're on a Wi-Fi and you're emulating a worse connection, you will only throttle it, but you won't have timeouts or interruptions in network the way that you will if you're traveling with a cellular device, for example.
Like being on a train or
yeah.
Yeah, and I think so. These are this is essentially the tech stack, and I think when I started out in this business 20 years ago, the biggest factor was probably the server and maybe also the browser. I think the browser is more under control as more of the big browsers are pushing out new updates regularly, so you don't have to manually install them. I think that has changed that landscape pretty much, meaning that you can leverage the performance support tools that the browsers have. We'll get into that later. One example is where lazy load now can be native in the browsers. That wasn't the case in the past. So by the browsers being pushed out in new releases, you can leverage new features more quicker, essentially.
Exactly.
And if you there will be a lot of terminology today, but these are some of the basics ones. Maybe you want to roughly just explain what they are.
I can go into those later, but I think for this slide and for testing in general, I think something that is good to know is that there's basically two main ways of testing performance. One is lab testing, and the other one is RAM testing. Lab is when you set up all the variables on your own on a server, and you test requests to your site repeatedly from maybe different countries, from emulated devices and connections, and you will get pretty consistent results. And that's a good way of measuring performance if you want to monitor it and if you want to see the difference before and after you make changes to your site, or before and after you add a new third party to it. But the other form of testing, RAM, is real user monitoring. That's where you include a script on your site that monitors the performance for your actual users, and you report that to somewhere where you can read it. And there's like those two ways have kind of different use cases. Like lab tests can fail if you don't set it up to be as close to your real users as possible. But it's, even if you don't, it can still be good for monitoring long term. Like, and if you have performance budgets, if you set up alerts for when your site performs badly, that's where you need lab tests. And real user monitoring is actually like it's useful in some cases, but usually if you optimize your site, if you make updates that make it faster, you could lower your real user values, because you might attract users on worse networks and worse devices. So it's good to know the difference between the two and use both to measure performance.
I think you, Henrik, said that there are things you can do to increase performance, like CDNs and clusters and everything, but essentially, what is the fastest way to deliver a website?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, I'm asking you.
Well, do few things. Like one of my favorite web pages is FOSS Stockholm-SE, and it's almost empty, and that's why it's fast.
No, I also think that you said that actually running one server with one
okay, I see what
one
you mean.
node where you don't really. I mean, there are things you can do to add scalability to support more users, but that can actually make the user performance worse. So I think you said that running just one.
Yeah, I
node.
mean, we have a slide further on saying that maybe we're getting ahead here, but that scalability is not the same as performance. If you have just one server, one physical machine that is like scaled, as you used to say, scaled vertically, you don't have any issues with latency or internal bandwidth bottlenecks talking over TCP with Redis and MySQL and stuff. You can talk to services directly over sockets, and you can use like shared memory and stuff, have a local cache and be close to the metal. And so that's you can't probably get higher performance than that, but at some point it's difficult to find a bigger server. And that's when you have to decide if you want more users or not.
More users or better performance.
Yeah.
I will get back to that. So what are we measuring and how are we measuring?
New Relic is really awesome, I think. Not the application itself, because I think it's kind of slow, which is ironic. But the insights you can get from looking at New Relic is really helpful. You can find all sorts of bottlenecks on the backend side. I'm not too familiar with the front end analysis tools in New Relic, but there are some, like monitoring of JavaScript errors and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, out of the list of tools here used for performance testing, I think I haven't used Pingdom in a while, but usually they just check for like cache headers and make sure that your network routing is okay, that you don't have a lot of redirects, and then they have some metrics on when the page is loaded. It's kind of, if they didn't make huge updates, then that's kind of, they're left behind somewhere. As far as the rest of them go, they all use the Lighthouse tests in one way or another. Like Google PageSpeed uses Lighthouse, webpagespeedtest.org/easy uses Lighthouse. Web Vitals, that's a part of Lighthouse 6.0. We will look at that later.
That was launched 2 weeks ago, right? 1 or 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, it's basically what they're calling the next version, major version of Lighthouse. But most of the tools available, they use Lighthouse in one way or another, and then they give you the possibility to choose what browsers or connections to emulate, or from where you want your traffic to come, kind of. And I think it's worth mentioning two services that do this. That is like speedcurve.com and then debugbear.com are both services using Lighthouse that you can set up to monitor your page. And also Debugbear has a pretty good blog on performance if you're into that.
But one is Debugbear, the other one is
speedcurve.com.
Okay. Should we then, so if this one is so important, we should dig deeper into how this works. And this is a rabbit hole that goes really, really deep.
Yeah. I mean, something about it is that is nice, I think, is that Lighthouse comes with every desktop version of Chrome. So for everyone attending this meeting probably has Lighthouse in their browser. If you go to your DevTools, you will have a tab called either Audits or Lighthouse in later versions of Chrome. And that's where you can run tests on the page you're currently at. And that's really good. But you have to know that when you do that, you're using your own device to test the site. Chrome will throttle the connection, it will throttle the processor, but it's kind of a dumb throttling. I think the the CPU is like a 4-time slowdown or something, and the same with the connection. So depending on what else you have running on your computer, or even what computer you're using, will affect test results.
So what are these terms we're looking at here?
Well, these are all measurements that Chrome scores depending on the timing of when they happen, pretty much.
And what do they mean?
What do they mean? They mean different things. I think it's probably better that I do a test and we can look at the actual numbers. It makes more sense if I can share screen. Then I can also show you how to access Lighthouse if you haven't used it. So I'll take over screen sharing. You're seeing me, right?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Okay, so this is an e-commerce site in Portugal. And if I go to my
it was like
tools,
a right click and inspect, right?
Yeah. And you go to the last tab, it has Lighthouse. They have some other tests than performance, but for today, performance is the important one. I would say don't bother testing for desktop. It doesn't really make any sense. Test for mobile, that's what you want to test, and only test the performance category. But what you want to do as well with your browser, if you're gonna use this testing to kind of and get consistent scores, you need to create a new browser profile or use a clean version of the browser with no plugins, because plugins usually will have ad block or some other tools that monitors your network traffic, and that will affect the test as well. It could make quite a big difference. And another tip is to set up 2 profiles. Set up one profile that has like no add-ons, and then set up another profile that has some add-on that can block third-party scripts. That way you can test your site with and without third parties, because in most cases those are things you can't do anything about. But anyway, if we click this generate report, you'll see on the left side that tests are running. It will load the page, and then it will show us a performance score. So basically, all of these numbers are what's measured. That was on the slide. First contentful paint, first meaningful paint, speed index, CPU idle, time to interactive, and then max potential input delay. If you want to go in depth on what they mean, and I suggest you do, I don't think we have time to go into all of them, but press this more information button and then go to learn more on each one of these. But shortly, it's like first contentful paint marks the time at which the first text or image is painted. First meaningful paint measures when the primary content of the page is visible. Speed index is how quickly the content of the page is populated. CPU idle is when the main thread is kind of finished booting up everything. Time to interactive is time to interactive, and max potential first input delay is kind of the longest running task in JavaScript or rendering, when how long that is, because that's, if you click in the beginning of that's how long the input delay will be, because the main thread is blocked. But these are the metrics that your score will be like calculated on. And if you want to kind of know the timing of these, like this number is one thing, but if you click the view trace here, it will go to a performance tab, and you can see these timings. If you zoom in on a part of the timeline, you can see when first paint happens, when first contentful paint, first meaningful paint, DOM content loaded, and the onload event happens. And you can also compare that to what the page looks like at the time. So first contentful paint is here. This is when content starts to populate. You can kind of see that, okay, that seems to be correct. This is when it populates. And then first meaningful paint is when the images are populated. That makes sense. And here's where the entire DOM is kind of finished and the loaded event is straight behind. I think it's really, if you want to dig into this, you need to get acquainted to this performance tab as well. But this is the current version of Lighthouse, and these are the current measurements. What happens like 2 weeks ago is that Google introduced something called Web Vitals, essential metrics for a healthy site. I suggest you go read about it on this web.dev is Google's like web developer portal where they introduce concepts and try to enforce new standards, kind of. But what they
Daniel, we
yeah.
got a question in chat. So when running Lighthouse multiple times on the same page, the score metrics usually vary a bit. Do you guys know why? Could this be related to the CPU usage as mentioned?
Yes, it could, and also your network, and also the site could vary. Like I would get if the page I was testing now, if it wasn't cached on the server, this score would be way lower probably.
So if you run another test now, do you think we'll get the same score?
For this site, I think so. Yes, yeah. But I mean, anything could have effect, and if you want to be able to rely on it, I mean, I usually use the browser testing when I'm working on something or when I quickly want to see what's up with a website. But for long-term measuring, I would suggest setting something up or using a service that does it once a day or something, and then you can see the trend, like the average scores.
I think even doing it once a day is not enough, because we've been testing a little bit with setting up like scheduled tests, and they vary a lot between different runs, even on the same page. And it's difficult to say if it's because of the server, if you have cache misses, or if it's the test itself that is varying a lot because it's guessing wrong on some of the metrics, because a lot of the metrics are estimations.
Yeah.
So I think to get some value out of that kind of testing, I think you would have to do some sort of statistical analysis of each test, or the sum of the tests.
Yeah.
Because the graph is like bouncing all over the place.
Exactly. But why I want to go into Web Vitals is because the measurements that Google use here, these metrics are gonna change with Web Vitals. They're gonna push for these 3 new measurements. So they will measure largest contentful paint, which is it's basically when the biggest element that shows on a user screen is finished. So if your start page, like in this case, whatever the element that is biggest here, when that shows, it will say that the biggest contentful paint is done. In this case, it would be one of these product images. Then they will measure the first input delay, which is when you can interact with the page. Visual stability is kind of what you're seeing on this screenshot graph. Like if this site jumps a lot when it renders, it's not visually stable. And this graph, if you draw across it, you will see kind of what a user on a really slow connection would see. Like it will start out white, and then some icons load, and then some outlined images, and then we have a jump here that's gonna cause that new measurement to go down. You want a 0 on that measurement, and it will like increase if you have things that jump.
We got another question. Will these new measurements influence the way we should approach designing our website, since images needs to be loaded, but text and color backgrounds will render faster?
Can you take it again? Sorry.
Will these new measurements influence the way we should approach designing a website, since images needs to be loaded, but text and color backgrounds will render faster? I think what you're is saying that if we know that an area will be populated, but it's not, the media is not there yet, should we display an empty area and then wait for the media, or should we rethink the way we design the site altogether?
No, I think we should still do it the same way. I mean, the way that's done here with images is kind of what is best practice. You want to show where the images will end up, and then you want to populate them. That's still gonna be the best way of doing it, like UX wise, for slow connections. What this new measurement is, it's kind of pushing it and saying that it's not really ready until images are there. Before, Google was saying that, okay, maybe you can still read the text, maybe you can still interact with the page before images are loaded, but now they're saying you actually have to find ways of serving the image faster as well. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do lazy loading. But what has happened is that, for example, they launched native lazy loading, so you don't need JavaScript for it. You can just change your image markup to use the native lazy loading, and the browser will be much quicker at populating images. And they will also be able to do it like more on a performant thread.
And I think that's better for performance, but ironically, the browsers in Lighthouse are still not using that feature, so you get worse scoring if you use the native lazy loading, right?
It depends what browser you use in Lighthouse. If the page speed insights, for example, they use some older version of Chrome, so they can't detect all of the things yet. But basically, these will be scores that they will implement in the next version of Lighthouse, and they also say that they will implement these in the Chrome user experience report, the page speed insights, and the Search Console. And I think this is really the big news, because this means that for the first time we will kind of measure this or use the same metrics for a lot of different tools. So I think it will make it easier for organizations to agree on the metrics.
Yeah, and I think the last part, the Search Console, is I think a lot of e-commerce managers are looking towards. Okay, so this is how I'm being scored from a performance view from Google in my search results, and I think that these numbers, as they are different mobile and desktop, if you don't deliver good mobile numbers, you're suffering on the mobile search results probably, and doing better on the desktop ones. I think. And I think that the fact that they started calling it vitals, I think you joked yesterday that the health trend is sort of coming to performance. It's more about an holistic view than like some few metrics. So I think you need to deliver a great website that performs well, that is a delight experience to use, not necessarily only fast.
I think it's really good. One of the most frustrating things with using the internet today is all the things jumping around when you try to click on them. Like even in Google software like Gmail, you're gonna click an email and then some new email pops up. And like it's really common to have like some like top header messages on pages that pushes all the content down when it loads. And I think it's great that he will be punished for those kinds of bad UX things.
Yeah, like going back to, do we need to rethink how the way we're designing? I think that the way they measure this is that as soon as a new element appears, they will see how big it is, and then they will wait for that to load, and then they will propagate an event that says that now this is now the biggest element and it's now rendered. So I think maybe the practices of using pop-ups that cover most of the screen that appear on page load, I mean, I think it's a way of kind of getting at that. I think it will lower your performance numbers if you consistently pop up messages overlaying the content of this page.
And I think my take on this is back like 15 years ago when you were tricking the PageRank algorithm with Google, you could trick Google to rank you higher. But nowadays people just give up. The only way to rank high is write good content that people like and link to. And Google will see through your trickery and it won't count. And I think that this is another step towards that direction, that you won't be able to trick Google. There are some tricks you can do now. You told me that if you put images in background instead of as image object, that could score higher, but it's only tricking the algorithm. It's not really building a better website.
Yeah. This is me running a separate test. I have the Chrome Canary browser where they have Lighthouse 6.0. I just want to show the difference in scores. So I'm running this on the same page. But now they're showing new metric numbers that they measure by. So they still have first content of paint, but then they have time to interactive, speed index, total blocking time, which is a new value as well, that they don't go through in the web vitals, largest contentful paint, and then cumulative layout shift. And this one should be low, of course. And largest contentful paint should be lower than this in the best case. If we look at the trace for this, it's actually largest contentful paint is now after page load, which is a kind of a shift. So this site would need to find ways of pushing images faster if they wanted a better performance score now.
Can you get into the calculator that you showed me earlier?
Yeah, exactly. So Google has this tool on the Lighthouse repository on GitHub where you can kind of play around with all these metrics and see what kind of score you can achieve. It could be useful.
Can you explain what the score 50 means? Because I think there's a lot of confusion about that.
I wrote it because I don't know it out of head. 50 basically means 50 in page speed score means that you're, I think it's like the 75th percentile. It means that you're better than 75% of the web. Like 100 page score means that you are better than 98% of the rest of the web. So it's kind of just the numbers are comparing to competition or comparing to the rest of the web. So say that all of the, like if the entire web gets better at performance, your score will decrease.
And I think that this is a very important takeaway that I didn't understand this like 2-3 weeks ago, that I thought these numbers were objective, but they're actually relative and sort of comparing you to the same audience you're competing with, right? It's not a global number. It's sort of.
I mean, these are, I think, fixed measurements that they score on, but they update.
Yeah. Okay.
They change the metrics, but they update the comparison with, I mean, their big data probably.
So we have objective numbers we can strive for.
Yes.
Just show that if you move this, I think if you just.
But I think the biggest misconception is like you get a score of 50 to between 50 and 80, and you think it's bad, but 50 is actually better than 75% of
the website
of the web, which makes it better than you thought probably. But this scoring calculator is kind of good if you're looking to optimize and you want to. It's kind of hard to know what will be the most bang for the buck. So you can, using this, you can play around with the values of these and see what happens to your score if you increase the first contentful paint by a second or lower it by 200 milliseconds or something.
And this is very, very good.
Yeah, it's more, I don't know, maybe more interesting to understand than actually useful. Maybe it's a good thing to know about.
Yeah, but isn't it a good tool to know as you said, what gives the most bang for the buck? Because if you have, there are at least two reasons for why you want to have a good score. You want to have a good user experience, and you want to have Google think that you have a good user experience.
Yes.
So you can, like, the best way to get a sense of your user experience is to use your website and see if it feels fun, nice to use. But this tool can be great to see, well, what can I invest time into to get better ranking, basically.
Yeah. Exactly, that's true. But also, because now we went through the metrics part of the performance tests in Lighthouse, but what they also offer that is super useful is the opportunities and the diagnostics about your page. So you will have a list of opportunities and how much estimated savings you will get out of doing them. And this is like easy as just expanding and then click learn more to figure out what can be done about it, basically. So for this site, they say that we should pre-connect to a lot of the third-party services used, and that will save time in initial boot up of the application. And then they say remove unused CSS. But in a lot of pages, what you will see here is either serve images in different formats or lazy load images, because that will push rendering times higher if you're not doing it right.
Cool. Should we head back to the what you should do then to get a great performance on your website? I can jump back to the.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else to add right now?
Sorry?
Do you have anything else you want to
add? I mean, a lot of things maybe, but I think time is a factor here. I could go on for days.
Yeah, and we will allow you to. I think you wrote this playbook for sort of priority for performance. Do you want to explain what you're getting at here?
I mean, this is kind of how I approach front-end performance measuring. One is like you have to kind of stay up to date on web best practices or new browser APIs or new browser features, or like, I don't know, it was maybe 6-7 years ago that images got support for serving multiple sources. So you can serve different sizes to different devices, and you can also do, with a picture tag, you can do like, you can control what formats you serve to for different screens.
I think what you're getting at there is a feature where we serve maybe 5-6 different candidates of images, and then it's up to the browser to choose which one the browser think it's best based on connection, based on screen resolution. So we actually don't really make that choice. It's up to the browser to implement that. These are your candidates for images. Choose whatever you think is most efficient.
Yeah. And what I'm getting at is that feature has been out for very long, and it's super well supported in browsers, but there's barely anyone doing it the way it's meant to be done.
I think two other examples is the web vitals that you mentioned, that the way your search ranking, which will be affected, will change in the Lighthouse formula pretty soon. And if you're not aware of that and just see that you're being downgraded and don't know why, that is a good example. I think the third one is the native lazy load, where you don't have to bother the browser with JavaScript anymore to have lazy loading, and that the browser can do it natively. I think these things are very, very powerful, but you need to, there's no slowing down. It's sort of like keeping up with the Google algorithm. It keeps changing all the time on the browser level, on the Lighthouse level as well.
Yeah, but but basically, I mean, stay up to date on new new things to make this better, because the images has got a lot of new features to kind of comply with what Google wants you to do with them. Also caching and the way you cache things in the browser has changed. You can now use the PWA cache for caching requests rather than saving resources in memory. Point 3, run multiple tests. Yeah, that's just how to test performance, I guess. And monitoring is, because if you don't do anything, your site will slowly degrade as the metrics. The metrics will get stricter for, given with these new measurements from Google, they will kind of tune them with time. Make sure that you need better numbers to reach the same score that you had. So you want to monitor, and you want to like put little by little time at fixing it. And I think, yeah, number 5 is something that I've been doing a lot, reviewing third parties. It's probably the hardest part of achieving a good page score, is that you have to include third-party scripts, and third-party scripts you usually can't control. But I think we need to get to a point where we evaluate third parties not only by the business value that they add, but also how much they take away from our performance.
And I think that the reason that we have the third-party problem, I think that on a basic website, maybe you have a recommendation engine like Nosto, you have a search engine, you have maybe a review system, you have tag manager, and maybe you have Hotjar, you have maybe Zendesk for web chat, and all of these provide excellent business value. And then the problem for them is, if you want to implement something fast, it becomes a very long technical project, and it falls apart. So instead, what they do is they build this master JavaScript. The salespeople say, listen, it's just a couple of lines of code, right? And that's an internal joke, because it's never just a couple of lines of code. But it actually is a lot fewer lines of code. But you're paying a huge price in performance, because you're adding all these scripts on top of each other that don't really. They speak toward the salespeople and the business value monitoring, but I think when you negotiate with third party, okay, what is the business value offer? What price can you get me? And how do you work to minimize the performance impact on my website? I think these are very, very relevant questions.
Yeah, and I think like a lot of guides you see on how to implement third parties as well, they serve their own purposes. Like a lot of the third-party vendors, they will ask you to put their script first so they can collect metrics, and I mean, you need to kind of analyze if that's the best thing to do here, because you don't want third-party scripts to interfere with your app. You don't want it to interfere with what you're trying to serve to the user. And a lot of the implementations of third-party services will ask you to prioritize their service over everything else that's supposed to be displayed on the page.
So if we go into a few common mistakes, I think this is a good checklist.
Yeah, this is basically also what the opportunities will show you in the Lighthouse tests. But a lot of the time it's about blocking resources. And blocking resources means that as the browser renders a page, if it finds a resource, it will synchronously make a request for that resource, and then it will wait for it, receive it, interpret it, and then render it, and then move on. So the way you want to make it render without the resource is usually lazy loading. And now lazy loading is native in Chrome and Firefox, so I think we can start using it finally. You also want to make sure that your fonts are rendered without receiving font files. There's new properties for that with font swap. You can also, like with media or JavaScript and CSS, you can preload them. There's link tags that allow you to make the requests before the resources are asked for, and you can even include headers on your server to say, as you retrieve this document, start loading these resources because they're vital to the page.
And I think that these blocking resources, an image that is not place loaded is a blocking resource, right?
Yeah.
A JavaScript is a blocking resource because it might be vital to the menu. It might be the browser doesn't really know what it is. So I think if you and also the style sheets that's needed to just show anything, colors, fonts, and then the fonts themselves, because sometimes you visit the page and you see that first there's a regular font and then the real font appears. It's because we need to wait for these resources. And when a third-party vendor said, hey, my script needs to be in the top before anything else, it just adds a blocker before we even start processing the page at all. So I think that's what we're saying, that these third-party companies always, they want to make it easy for themselves. And sometimes the people who write these third-party scripts are not always the rocket scientists, or they're being pushed too hard to deliver quick, that we make a priority for business value over performance, which could, of course, from their perspective, make sense. But if our objective is to have high performance, we need to work around this. And it means that some really Zendesk is a horrible third-party script. It's a great product, but it's killing your performance.
Yeah. But it's, I would like to, like, third party, not all of them are bad. There are really good ones as well. But
What are the good ones?
I mean, Google Tag Manager, Google Analytics, those are very well optimized.
Mm-hmm. Depending on what you put in your Tag Manager.
Depending on what you put in your Google Tag Manager, yeah. But just putting Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics on a page is usually not something that will ruin your performance. It's if you put more things into your tag manager.
And I think this is where what we do for a living, I think our responsibility to help people select high performing third parties is going to be increasingly important. And not just performance, also how if they make the page bounce around, it's going to essentially going to kill our Google result. So this is a very long cascading. The ripple effects are everywhere now. So I think this will be increasingly important.
Yeah. Exactly. Where was I in this list? Point 2, I guess. You
were in push and preload.
Yeah, I mean, there's now native ways of telling the browser which resources to prioritize, and we need to do that. It's really easy, and it's a way of increasing these numbers very, very much. And even consider even going through the order that your resources are declared. Like on a system level, if you use Magento or Salesforce, they're usually embedded somewhere in the system, but it might be worth the time to reorder them in priority order if that's not the case. Do images right. That's just about knowledge on how images on the web works now, with all the source sets and picture tags and lazy loading. Number 5, consider a CDN. It's kind of a no-brainer, I guess. A lot of people do have this, but it could make a huge difference. Probably not for your main audience. It will probably make the biggest difference for your secondary audience, or if you have a global site or a Europe site, like if you have a server based in Sweden with no CDN and most of your clients are from Sweden, a CDN might make your page score go up, but probably not by much.
It wouldn't be the highest priority in this list to get better performance.
No, I don't think so. actually.
Maybe it depends on what the CDN is doing, because if your CDN has a really good like image optimization service that you're using, then of course it gives you something. But if your servers are already close to the users, you don't get the other benefit of having a CDN, which is to have a shorter distance to the end user.
So what you're saying, a good CDN can cover for some of the shortages you have elsewhere in your architecture.
Yeah, I mean, some CDNs make it their business idea to kind of offer front-end performance boosts.
Yeah,
a lot of the bigger ones they have services that do all of like point 1 to 4 for you.
You can sort of outsource priority preload and
exactly. And in some cases, if you have the budget, that might be the right choice. I mean, they know what they're doing, but you're kind of stuck with that CDN service then. You're really dependent on it. Yeah, save refactoring to last. That's something I put in there because I think a lot of people, when talking about performance on the web, like the first idea of something not performing is like, oh, but we're using jQuery and it's slow, or oh, but we're using X library and it's not good anymore. I think you can build performant web pages in any framework or without frameworks, or I wouldn't start with refactoring or rebuilding your website because it's not performing. There's other ways that are cheaper and more effective. And 7 is just something you can do. There's a lot of the older frameworks. They have a lot of support for browsers that we don't consider alive anymore, like Internet Explorer 6, and they do things that is slower because of that. And one way of optimizing could be dropping that browser support, making sure to remove the usage of those frameworks or methods or polyfills.
There's a lot of information. It's an information shower. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to push them in the chat. We're eager to respond if you have them. Yeah, so maybe that brings up another hot potato in the business, where you have the multi-page application, which is more normal in e-commerce, and then you have the single-page application, essentially where the website behaves like an app, and this is maybe most commonly referred to as headless. And this has been a 1 or 2 year long debate we had internally. Should we go headless? Should we go all in on single page? And there's a lot of drawbacks to it. There's some advantages, but I think we've in the end settled, our priority is not headless. Our priority is performance. And you can definitely get the same performance on multi-page or single page. And there are some pros and cons. And generally, we are in team multi-page, not for different reasons there, and we'll get into it. But I think there's this statement I think is a good talking point. Maybe it's for you, Henrik.
Maybe, but we touched on it before that. The fastest thing is to do as few things as possible, to have as a simple infrastructure as possible. But if your plan is to grow and become the biggest, you need to be able to scale. And you can do it, of course, you can do it in steps, or you can do it like plan it from the very get-go to have a scalable platform from the very beginning. But maybe I'm not sure what the best approach is, but to have the absolute fastest kind of page, I think, is to have a simple infrastructure, to have like them using Varnish or something to serve pre-rendered HTML page that the browser can just parse and show to you, instead of like a single page application that is based on, it requires a lot of, you rely a lot of your on your business logic running in the user device, and you can get like a lot of maybe nice interactivity from the interactions with the page being responsive, because an action might not load a new page, it might load it from cache or something, but you can do that with a multi-page application as well. I think going to a single page application is a bit like downloading an app, because on the first page, when you have never been there before, there's so much more JavaScript that you need to download this system to your browser, and that's the drawback. Yeah, there's just a lot of, you just rely a lot of on the client device rendering the page for you, instead of storing it cached on the server side, like pre-rendered in a cache.
And that's like the way you would optimize an app like that is doing just that. You would just send the chunks of the business logic that you need first, and then you would render servers on the page. Like that's how you make a single page application perform better. So there's probably like there's advantages with both, and there's disadvantages with both, and there's probably a sweet spot in between somewhere. And there's been, I don't know, it's probably in my Twitter bubble, but there's a lot of talk about finding some kind of compromise in between. And there are also some initiatives from Google that might make it easier to build more app-like multiplex applications and server rendered stuff, because they realize that the complexity of maintaining single page application architecture, especially for like e-commerce, which is one of the more complex systems you can build, is kind of, I mean, it gets unmaintainable, because in a lot of cases you need the same business logic on the back end and the front end for it to actually work. So there's a lot of redundancies.
Yeah.
And then there's like a lot of more layers of caching that needs to happen.
And also, as I said in the beginning, if you view the internet through one of these bad boys, then it's like a single page application, or like an application that relies on having a lot of the business logic in the device. Then the experience is tied to the power of the device. And I have never been on a mobile page that has impressed me in this device.
But to try to answer what is best for e-commerce, I think both can be really good if they're well done. Both can be really bad if they're not well done. But I think emphasis is on the quality of the app rather than the architecture used. And I think generally that single page architecture is more costly.
Costly in what aspect?
Well, you have to invest more to get up and running, and then you have to maintain both the back end and the front end separately.
And I also, and I think that the cost is also that there's no e-commerce platform with a headless ecosystem, meaning that if you want to implement third-party services, you essentially have to do it on your own. I think you're spending money on implementation, you're spending money on maintenance, and you're not really getting a performance advantage. If your goal is performance, single patch application is probably not the way to go, because we can get almost the same. We can get the same results. We can just on first page you definitely get faster. On the second, it can be a hard competition. But I think you're adding a lot of uncertainty to the mix because we don't know what the device you're using. We're essentially moving some performance issues from back end to front end. And the front end, as we said, is the highest variable factor. So it requires a high performing user device. And so if we're now building these scores into the Google search result more and more, and we're building a heavy front end application that we necessarily can't control the experience of, I think we're exposing ourselves to a lot of risk and uncertainty. And so I think that hasn't also Google made a slightly policy change? Initially they were for SPA, but now they're more agnostic.
I mean, part of the
sorry.
Yeah, part of the PWA specification. I mean, it's basically a set of rules you follow, and you get a score of how much of a PWA you are. And initially, in one of those tests, they had they had a point that was that you needed to be an SPA to be considered a PWA. But since in the initial launch of PWA, the PWA concept, they removed it, and now it's just they kind of made the point to be instead that an app shouldn't feel like it's blocking on the network while navigating.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a totally different thing than saying you have to be a single page application.
And I think that the main reason for having a single page application is when you have a bird's nest of backend systems you want to mix into a unified experience, then I think this is probably an efficient way. But then it's not for the performance reasons, it's for the architect reasons. And I think that we have more and more lean towards the multi-page, maybe because of the standards, like the PWA standards and the browsers has caught up, and sort of the user experience you end up with, it's not that different from a single page application anymore. Well-written multi-page application is really fast.
I think the main reason why we're leaning towards multi-page applications is that the platforms we're working with are in their default out-of-the-box model, they are multi-page applications. That's how they are built. And the single-page application initiative that Magento has, for instance, is an afterthought. It's built on top of the existing system.
Yeah. I know that Salesforce is now offering a headless, but that is typically to merge like 4 or 5 other different clouds into one user experience. But you still have the multi-page alternative, which is the main one. I think you have Commerce Tools, which is a headless app. What is it? View Store? What is it? View Stores? View
Storefront, yeah.
Storefront. Those are available. I think what I tell people that if you want a good e-commerce, you need the biggest ecosystem, and there's no great single page application e-commerce ecosystem yet that I'm aware of. And it seems like Magento, we thought they were heading in that direction, but it seems like they're going all in on PWA instead. There is always a place for single page, but it's not. I think it's less obvious that it's the default future. I think it's one alternative you can go. And I think it's more about, maybe it's less about SPA versus MPA, and more about sticking to the best practices that we mentioned earlier. And if you can achieve that with single page, fine, do that. If you do it multi-page, fine, do that. Yeah, the point is you need to follow, we need to behave as Google wants us to behave, because they are dictating the rules of performance on the internet, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are like reasons to do an SPA that you can only do with SPA, like YouTube, for instance. When you can watch a video and then go back to browsing videos and have it still playing.
Yeah.
Like a small window, you can't do that with a multi-page application.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's a special use case. So for an e-commerce site, maybe you don't have videos that play over multiple page views, so you don't. There's a quote I like that it's the problem is the problem.
What do you mean by that?
I mean that, well, if the answer is general, like if you're an SPA guy or an MPA guy, your answer is always general, but the problem is never general. The problem is always particular.
It's very specific. if you
Yeah,
go to
you
specific,
choose what your approach. You choose your approach based on what the thing you're trying to solve is.
Okay. Do you want to add something on the server side before we wrap up?
Maybe it depends on how much time you want to spend on this. I can just briefly say that we've been talking a lot about front end, and that's probably the most interesting thing to talk about, because that's the biggest like moving target, and that's the like what the latest decisions Chrome or Google made to how they will punish or promote aspects or behaviors of your site. Is like it's in the front end layer. Talking about server-side performance, it hasn't really changed much in the last, I don't know exactly, 5-10 years. But there are just some brief points. Number one is cache, and cache could be the only point, I would say. Cache is needed because things are slow. Like Magento is slow, PHP that it's built on is slow. It's like it's a high-level language without any, don't have any explicit control over how memory is allocated, and it's garbage collected, and it's like it's slow. I like PHP, so I'm not. I didn't build a better language myself yet, so. But you could build something else, and Magento is built on top of PHP, and Magento has this problem that is a good problem for them, I guess, that they are the most popular open source PHP project in the world, I think. And as such, they have to accommodate for the needs of the whole world. They have to be a generic system that can do anything. So they have to go in like roundabout ways to solve issues and be less flexible. So they end up like doing everything, but at the same time doing nothing, because they solve a general problem, not a particular problem. And so because of this slowness, cache is really important. And caching is like, basically the principle is that you ask the system to generate some output, and then you store that output and save it for later when it's asked for again, so you reuse it. And the cache is complex because it's multi-layered. There's like layers upon layers, from the application to the language level down to this, even to the CPU level. And at all these levels, you can have bugs where things get stuck in cache, and you're not sure why the new thing you're trying to publish isn't showing up, and it could be anywhere. There's a complexity there that is unfortunate, but cache is absolutely vital to having a performant website. And so spending time on making sure that you have a good hit rate on cache is really important. Thinking about how you segment cache, how many variations of a page do you have? Like you can have, say you have 5 stores with 5 customer groups and 5 currencies or something. It becomes a combinatorial explosion of the possible types of one page could be.
Yeah.
And so it like, in that case, I guess it's like 125% times more likely that you will hit a cache miss, get a cache miss.
Yeah. So you will overwhelm the cache, so it will refill all the time. So it doesn't really become a cache. It's just an engine.
Yeah, it's still a cache, but it's like very much less offloading. And also, so that's one part, like thinking about how many like variations you want to have of your site, but also like how is it cleared, because you don't want to flush the entire site. You want to have a granular purging scheme where you only remove from cache just the things that you want to renew. And so you can think about maybe like with integrations and stuff, when you import products from a separate system or import stock balance, do we have to do this during the busiest hours and that kind of thing. It's good to consider. So in Improove Core, we have added a feature where you, if you go into the cache clearing section of Magento, you have to actually sign in with bank ID to confirm the flushing.
Yeah, I heard one
That's
of
super
our
important.
I had one project where they actually, the company disabled the clear cache button because the client was clicking on it all the time. So when they clicked, they thought they cleared the cache, but nothing happened. So that's also a way to use it.
Yeah, but it's really understandable, because if you're working with content, or if you're like in a purchaser or something that's adding a new product, you want to see how it looks on the site. But it's a problem. So I think maybe spend more time on building a preview system or something that you can.
I think that's something that Salesforce is doing really well. You're not really allowed to work in the production environment. You only work in staging, and then it replicates data regularly. So once it boots up, it's already cached and very well behaving. I mean, you could work in production, but it's so seamless just to get into the staging environment. I think you sort of ignore that one. So I think that is and that's not really a tech advantage. It's more like a workflow advantage. I think if you use, I know that Magento has this as well, but I think too few people use it, where you work in a staging environment and then replicate over to production.
Yeah.
Quickly before we wrap up, the Baylor, I think, is a bundle for Magento people.
Yeah, I just want to say most of these things, and we touched on some of them in what Daniel talked about as well, that most of these things are different strategies to work around the problem of the system being slow, like trying to avoid talking to the system as much as possible.
Yeah.
All of these things. And Baylor is no exception. It's an initiative from Magento. Like they have put a lot of effort into their PWA, but they have one lone warrior still working on the old front end, I think. Maybe not even anymore, but he started building like this JavaScript bundler that is, well, there is a built-in bundler in Magento, but it bundles all the JavaScripts, I think, and it becomes like this huge, like 5 megabyte JavaScript blob that you have to download on every page. So Baylor is, or Baylor, I don't know how it's pronounced, is a smarter version of that tries to combine the most commonly used scripts into one bundle. So it's a smaller bundle, but it's like the bundle that you will need on every page.
Yeah. So
and if you have further dependencies on other scripts that are rarely used, it will still download in the old way, but you have a benefit because if you have a bundle for all the things that you know that they will be used anyway, you don't have to make extra HTTP round trips to get them one by one and have a blocking chain in require JS. So I think that's a really neat, like a hack, you could say, that helps giving better scores and a lot better user experience, I think, in my opinion.
So to wrap up, I hate the versus things. I think we work with these two platforms or multiple others. I think that generally Salesforce is a SaaS platform. So the lower part of the tech stack is not available at all. It's like a black box, meaning that you get a lot of good things out of the box. You get A/B testing, you get personalization, you get the CDN advantage. Everything is there. You can't turn it off. Magento has the cloud version that is close, but not all the way, but it's a really good one as well. But Magento on-premise is where you open up the black box, and I think you need the Baylor stuff. You need to have access to an on-premise Magento platform, because I guess you can't do it on.
I don't know if you have. You can probably do it on cloud, but it requires more.
Yeah.
Trickery.
And I think your final point, Daniel, is pretty on point. Yeah, you can choose tomatoes, but in the end, it's just about the third-party scripts anyway. So if you want really good, from server-side performance, go Magento Cloud. Salesforce is always fast. You can't really slow it down. But to the front end component where all the moving parts are, the third-party script is probably your biggest enemy anyway. And I think, yeah, there's also maybe one advantage with Salesforce where you have the search engine, you have the recommendation, and you have very few third-party services in general. A lot is bundled, so I think it's a little bit easier to get there faster. But you can get equally fast with both platforms. You need to tweak a little bit more, but also be responsible, because it's very easy to wreck a system where you have full control over. I think it's fair to say. Okay. Yeah. Closing words, Daniel, before we wrap up.
Yeah. Basically, these are like closing words. If you intend to get serious about performance on your own site, I think these are the things you need to look into. Is to set budgets. Like what numbers are acceptable, and then monitor those budgets. Make sure they are followed, and budgets will kind of force your entire organization to work together on something. It's not only a tech team that can set the budgets. Your sales team needs to agree on them. They need to know that when they add something to Google Tag Managers, it will affect their budgets. Maybe they need to remove something if they add something, or like one in, one out kind of thing. I think the business in general we have to get better at pushing third-party providers to deliver better non-intrusive scripts. Like maybe on sales pitches where they tell us what business value they add, they may also need to present how little they impact performance or how much, and we need to kind of calculate, because bad performance will cost you business as well. So some of these providers, the way they currently provide bad scripts that ruin the user experience, like some of them might just cancel themselves out. They add value, but they also remove value. Yeah, and the last point is even analytics has a price. Like, I think there's like some kind of truth in that. Even if you don't know what to do with it, collect all the data. But collecting data takes performance.
Yeah.
So please collect only what you need.
We got a final question. How about web components and performance? What's your take?
I think web components is not meant to solve performance issues specifically. I think they're kind of a way of replacing certain frameworks, more so. Like it's an ability to build reusable components. Mm-hmm. And I think I love web components. That's all I do in my spare time. But I don't think it's, I mean, down the line maybe it will be more performant than other approaches, but mm-hmm. The way people use web components now is usually with another third-party library that polyfills everything and adds routing and stuff to your app, because components or web components as they are just super simple ways of building reusable parts of the UI.
So you said that the web components themselves are neutral on performance. It's not about performance. It's a different purpose.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I think. I hope web components will be used soon, because it's really neat. It's a neat idea. But some of the frameworks that you use now for single page applications, like you can build components in those libraries, but those components are not kind of the same thing that web components are trying to solve. There's different problems. Mm-hmm. The problem is the problem, like Henrik said. And I think for web components to gain traction, there also needs to be some kind of native way for data bindings in the browser that doesn't currently exist really, like two-way data bindings. Did
Cool.
that answer the question?
We'll see in the chat. Any other questions? Feel free to shout them before we wrap up. Are you Daniel on Twitter, by the way?
Yes.
You mind if I we have your Twitter handle in the chat if you want to reach out to Daniel. Yeah, I think these are good closing words. I mean, and I think there's especially you business people, like when you're shopping for new services, please make sure that you're reviewing the performance angle as well. Or if you don't, at least don't punish the people responsible for performance for not doing better if the tools we're given are too. So I think this will probably be, I think the new V6 measurements will probably put much more pressure on these third party to the jump around things and performance. So I think this is a good.
Yeah, and read web.dev to stay up to date on things. It's a really good page.
Cool. That's all I had for now. Henrik, do you want to add something?
Nah, be safe. Have a nice day. That's all.
Wash your hands. Stay at home.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for today. And we'll post this recording on YouTube once it's done for you to review later. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.